Welcome everyone to the AA-ISP webinar series. We're so glad that you've joined us. My name is Bob Perkins. I'm the founder and chairman of the AA-ISP. I see many of you on the line today, and I know lots of you out there. In fact, we have a really good turnout today, so thanks so much for registering. Today's topic is really exciting, and it's near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about outbound calling, and our presenter is going to talk about the current landscape and the challenges, and also he'll be sharing some great tips and some really good best practices. You're going to be able to lead today's webinar and use some of these things right away. I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but it's been harder and harder than ever to really get people on the phone. In fact, we were speaking earlier about the fact that people lots of times are away from their desk phone. Some people don't even have a desk phone. So we're going to cover lots of things about how to become much more effective. I am really excited to welcome today's presenter, Joe Cronin, who's the Inside Sales Manager at ConnectLeader. ConnectLeader is a partner, a sponsor of the AA-ISP. In fact, in our own sales group, or we call it the member services, we use ConnectLeader to help us to get through to people. But that's not why he's here. He's going to share some great information with you. He's no stranger to hundreds and thousands, maybe even 1 million outbound calls. We'll have to find out, Joe, how many outbound calls your team has made over the last 10 years. But welcome to the webinar today. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor. I'm a big fan of the AA-ISP and a big fan of yours, so it's really great to be here.
So let's get started. You know, I know you're going to start off sharing some the current landscape. What's going on in the outbound calling world?
Right. So here's the plan of how we'll proceed today. Is I want to talk about some of the challenges related to calling, some of the challenges that folks don't talk about often enough. Sometimes we're just always talking about the solutions, not talking about kind of what the real life is for that SDR, that sales rep that needs to make a whole bunch of calls. So we'll talk today about your typical kind of outbound calling in terms of at scale kind of cold calling, just try to do that new prospecting. But we'll also talk about, you know, obviously Cadence has really gained popularity in the last couple of years. And we'll talk about, you know, Cadence, to really do it right, you need to get those dials behind it and to get those calls, to really get those conversations going. And then finally, we'll take a couple minutes and talk about calling as it relates to inbound lead follow-up, which obviously can generate lots of really important business for many companies. So with that, we'll keep going here. And you know, the first slide is to make it clear that, hey, listen, the typical out there for a rep isn't that, hey, make a few calls, people pick up and they're ready to talk. That's not what's happening at all. This is not how it happens, that people are sitting back with their feet up on their desk, just ready to engage in a conversation. Instead, it's a ton of work for that rep doing the outbound calling. And it's getting harder and harder. And part of the reason it's harder is because of the fact that data continues to decay. Obviously, we're in a bit of a hot economy right now. People are moving around. People are leaving from one company to the next. So data that you bought yesterday isn't as good today as it was yesterday. And what we're seeing here are some stats related to, there's about a 30 to 50% decay in data on an annual basis. Meaning, as you see here, you start with 100,000 contacts. By the end of the year, you might have 30 to 50,000 that aren't really very valuable anymore. So we need to really focus on getting that data right, because of the fact that this is what the life of a rep that, we at ConnectLeader, forever we're talking to sales leaders that are telling us, yeah, we have our reps making 100 to 150 calls a day. And then okay, that's great. But what are you doing in terms of conversations? And this is what we see time and time again. And just throughout the industry, you hear this kind of number of 22 to 30 dials is typical in terms of it takes that many dials to get a conversation. And what you see here is, what's that really mean? 5 to 10 prospect conversations. And so that's, for that rep, they are not getting really as many at-bats as they should. And let me ask you a question, Bob. I know, like you mentioned, you have folks doing some outbound calling there at the AA-ISP. When you interview, how often do you talk about, hey, Fred, how are you at leaving voicemail? How good are you at getting beyond the gatekeeper? How good are you at dialing by name? How much does that come up in the interview process?
Well, sometimes it does, but it's, now that you mention it, it's certainly crucial and critical because, hey, look, that stat you just shared, Joe, made my opening point. I figure 3 to 4% of your calls are getting someone to answer the phone. Hello, this is Bob. It wasn't that long ago that we stood by 8, 10, 12, sometimes 15%, because today's world being digital and mobile, it's harder than ever. So, hey, Joe, I forgot to remind people, if you're on the webinar today, please feel free to use the chat button if you have a comment, a question. You can also use the Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get your question answered or share your comment.
Yeah, that would be...
Joe, back to you.
Yeah, that would be great. And related to the data is, yeah, you can have the data right, and guess what happens sometimes is more and more that the data, it's not clear what's the direct line in the office and versus what is the actual mobile number, that you're not sure where you're getting someone. So you might get the right person at truly the wrong time. So what I want to focus on today a bit is Cody. Here's Cody. Do you see him on your screen here, Bob?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes, yep, we see
you
Cody.
do. Okay, good. Cody is, think of the typical SDR that is, college educated, energetic, smart. He's a go-getter, but he's only getting those 5 to 10 at-bats per day. So what we're talking about right now is how can we help Cody and ultimately help Cody's company in terms of more opportunities in the pipeline, more closed business. And so we want to keep at cold calling. It works, right? And you and I both know this, that it works because you get to create those trusted relationships in terms of it's Bob and Joe. It's not just a form fill, right? And 6 other vendors. And you're able to find, sometimes stumble upon the ones that are already in marketing, that are in market, that you haven't spent those marketing dollars to find, but they're already, maybe down the path, but you can get in there right at the right time with a short sales cycle. Also, you just have that first in advantage sometimes, right? That if I call you, I get you on the phone, you've never heard of concept ABC, but now I get it in your head, you're now my champion over at that organization. So obviously cold calling works. It will always work. It's a matter of getting those right people on the phone. But ultimately, one of the greatest things about cold calling is you get to really find those problems in need of your solution, meaning that you can do all the marketing in the world, but until you start to really understand the customer's challenges, you might not be able to get the right presentation of the right value in front of them. So with that said, what's the solution? We know that the data is tough. We know it's harder and harder to get people on the phone. What do you do in terms of improving upon that? And one thing I really recommend to everyone is just get the data straight, right? Whether you use Zoom Info or Discover.org or any, some of the other data vendors, or even do something like Upwork where you're outsourcing the activity at a low wage kind of way. Do whatever it takes to get that right data so that you get Cody talking to the right prospects as often as possible. And then also, along with that, you have a responsibility to continue scrubbing your data in your organization as those calls are being made, as those emails are going out, that you're continually scrubbing the data and making sure you have that data hygiene at your organization. And if you're finding that you're limited in terms of the number of calls you can make, then guess what you should do? You should focus on your ideal customer profile. I mean, everyone should be anyway, but if you have a limitation in terms of the number of calls you can make sure you're making those calls to the right folks out there. And with that, obviously sales engagement comes into play in terms of helping that SDR, my fictitious guy there, Cody, helping him be successful. And one of the things is, obviously, as sales management, we just need reporting. We talk to all kinds of folks that they can tell us they make 100 to 150 calls a day, supposedly, but they don't really have the reports to back up what's going on in terms of the outcomes of the dials or the conversations. And Bob, maybe if you want to jump in here for a moment.
Yeah, look, I think you hit the nail on the head. I talk to so many sales leaders. They ask me, they go, "What's the current metrics for number of outbound calls?" And I'm like, well, I think you're focused on the wrong thing. Let's focus on how many conversations you have, and that's the most important thing. That especially if you're in an SDR BDR prospecting world, let's get away from these metrics. We got to get back to the outcomes, because listen, over the years I've done lots of correlation studies, Joe, that in some cases the person who dialed the phone the most number of times was not the person that had the most conversations or conversions from conversations to opportunities. So be careful with that. And Joe, we did get a question. You can stay on this topic, but here is a question from your last slide. And I know you had an example of a data provider. Do you have any other suggestions, or who do you recommend for a data provider? And sorry to kind of make you go back a slide, but
yeah, sure. I mean, the two clear winners in my mind, just from talking to lots of folks in this space in our is both super solid. Those are recommended. Yeah. So as you were saying, it's not all about dials, but you can't just make one dial a day, or you're only going to have one conversation a day, right?
Wouldn't that be nice?
So part of the deal with sales engagement is you need to get as many dials as you can and make that SDR or that sales rep's life easier in terms of getting those dials out there. And also, folks have opinions on local presence in terms of, I pick up the phone and I thought it was a local call. I thought it was my wife and I was tricked, and they don't like that. And so they don't allow their sales reps to use that technology. Well, guess what? If you can double or triple the number of conversations that your SDRs, your sales reps have, obviously it's something that you need to look at. We never say that everyone should do it all the time, but you certainly should test it. And if it can get you those almighty conversations, you should be doing it. And similar is pre-recorded voicemails. Being able to, there's some voicemails that don't need to be that custom Joe to Bob, very personalized voicemail. It's the same one I'm going to leave for 50 other people. In those cases, why not push a button, leave exactly the same voicemail, one that resonates, and be able to have that touch for the next time you actually get them live on the phone. And very quickly, as we finish off this slide, is super important is call recording. It's the only way that, go back to the data problem, so hard to get people on the phone, you're only getting 5 to 10 conversations a day. Well, you better make sure that your rep is doing all they can with those conversations and helping them and training them, helping them get better at their craft. And one of the best ways to do that is both call monitoring and call recording. So anyone who's serious about sales engagement in 2019, I think it's just a must. And then related to that is email cadence, is get that matchup of both calls and emails out there. And I promised as part of this webinar, we'd throw in some tips for really helping folks be successful on calls.
Hey, Joe,
Yeah.
Something just came in here. Most people, I'm sure, know what local presence is, but there's a few out there that may not know. Can you explain that and how much you think it helps?
Of course, yeah. And it's this concept of let's say we're calling into San Francisco from the Boston area. And instead of seeing the 617 Boston number on the local caller ID of that prospect, instead that prospect maybe sees 415 and they say, gee whiz, I let most of my calls go to voicemail, but in this particular case, I see it's local. It might be the babysitter or the mechanic, so I'm going to pick it up. And so you end up getting more actual pickups than you otherwise would.
Great. Thank you.
For sure. And so here's these are basics, and folks at AA-ISP talk about this kind of thing all the time. So we'll just quickly kind of go over, and obviously we'll make these slides available. But again, we have that rep and they're only getting the 5 to 10 conversations. They better be good at what they do on the phone. So really prepare and practice and make sure that they have a somewhat of a script with a strong opener, something that, you have to almost imagine that prospect with the phone a few inches away from their ear when it first comes in, and they're just doing everything they can to get off the phone. And so you need to catch them with a real strong opener, acknowledge that they're busy, you caught them at a bad time, and let them know that you have something of value. And really, what I have to emphasize is, because I get calls all the time from folks in this space, and sometimes you can tell you're one of many. They're going to move on to their next call immediately after you, and they just don't really have any conviction in what they're talking about. And so guess what? I don't feel like I really need to set a meeting with them, schedule time. And related to that is, I recommend that folks really show the value of how they can help that prospect as quickly as possible. And sometimes instead of begging for the meeting, asking for the meeting, really once you've established through good questions and listening to that prospect, really just suggesting a time that, well, Bob, it sounds like we're on the same page here. This is something it probably makes sense for you to look at. Tuesday at 3 o'clock work for you? That sort of thing. Does that make sense to you, Bob?
Yeah, no, listen, there's a couple of things you said. I got a question on the opener here in a minute, but let me reflect on the two things you said. I think get right to the value is key. You're not wasting the person's time. And you know what? I was at a company that did outbound calling. They were an outsourced BDR SDR team, and literally, Joe, I heard this one rep ask 3 times for the meeting, 3 times, and guess what? He got it. So I like your direct approach. Just ask for the time. So I would agree with that. Now, my question on the strong opener, I'm a big believer in personalization. Now, I know not every call can be personalized, but I would say that if it's an important call and you really want to make an impression, I tell people, try to say something about the person or about the company they work at in your first breath, if you can, right? Hey, Joe, it's Bob here at the AA-ISP. I just attended your webinar last week, and I can't believe how many tips I got. Well, guess what? You're going to probably go, oh, well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, it was a fun webinar. What are your thoughts on that, if and when you can personalize?
Absolutely. And if not your first breath, your second breath, right?
Yeah.
But make it
Yeah.
about them and make them feel like they're not one of many, that maybe this is your only call of the day. And back to the guy that you saw ask for the meeting 3 times and get it, that persistence does really pay off. And Bob, I bet you've been on the other side of it, that someone asked you 2 times and you sure were glad they didn't ask you the third, because if you had been asked the third, you probably would have said yes to the meeting just because they were so persistent, right?
Well, that's kind of human nature. And, certainly we're not, neither you or I are advocating badger the person whatsoever, but I call it professional persistence done in the right way does pay off.
Exactly. Backed up with conviction that you believe you can really help this person and provide value.
Bingo.
And if you can't get the meeting, I want to emphasize today is that because the data is so tough, because you're only getting those 5 to 10 conversations, make sure that every conversation counts to some extent. If you don't get the meeting, absolutely, obviously try to get the referral, schedule a follow-up, get some intelligence. Maybe even you're going to establish that it truly is just not a right fit. There's not a value there in terms of what you're selling. But the idea that, well, I'll just make another call, those days were gone in 2015, and certainly in 2019, every call you have to make as much out of as you can.
I really agree with this last point. And I tell this to people all the time. The one thing I forget, all salespeople, we do forget to ask for additional information, ask for a referral, put a Post-it note on your phone or your screen, ask for a referral, and it could be, anything. We forget that. Here's another tip on get the intelligence. This was a great one. I learned this from one of our presenters at a conference, and he said, when you secure the meeting, once you got the meeting, yep, next Wednesday at 2 p.m. works, he said, ask this question. He goes, hey, before we hang up, and just in case something comes up and I need to reschedule, or I need to contact you right before the meeting, what's your cell phone number? You'd be surprised how many people will, 9 out of 10 will give you their cell phone number after you've secured the meeting.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And guess what? Once they have given you that cell phone number, the chances that they will just completely kind of bail on the meeting and leave you hanging go down, right?
Yeah.
So from here, we've been talking about really old school cold calling and, calling at scale, right? We're going to move a little bit now and talk about Cadence, which obviously everyone's been talking about the last couple of years, in terms of how fantastic is it to do what we all should have been doing all along anyway, in terms of really having this sequence of getting your calls out and timing them with emails, and being able to make sure that email goes out, then call, then email, then call, or vice versa. But being really smart in terms of these touches that go out to prospects, it's fantastic. And you can do it in a short period of time. And theoretically, you can really have full coverage to your addressable market. And what could be better? But my question for you, Bob, is how long does it take a rep to send out 100 emails with one of these Cadence products? Less, and I don't know if you're on mute, Bob.
Yep. Yeah, I would say with the right tool, with the right technology, not that long. If you're doing it, one at a time, personalization, well, it takes a lot of time. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, trick question. The reality is, for the rep, it takes 0.0 seconds of their time to send out 100 emails a day. And here's the challenge, is that with Cadence, it's very easy for reps and management who have bought in on the idea of Cadence to say, well, let's get everyone in a Cadence, right?
Yeah.
And start sending out those emails, and let's put in 100 a day. And so if you look at this slide, you see where, okay, you get 500 emails out that first week. Next week, you're up to 1,000. Next week, you're up to 1,500. By the end of that third week, here's the problem, is your rep is still at that 100 calls a day. And so, like we've been talking about, on the upside, 10 conversations a day, you're now looking at, maybe there's 150 conversations by the end of that 3 weeks. For those prospects that you've been emailing, there's 1,350 that don't even know that you've called, probably, right? And so you're sending out a bunch of email, but ultimately what's happening too often is that rep is in a situation that they've sent out so many emails and they're trying to catch up with the phone calls, but they're out of sync. And so, if we go back to Cody, that first kind of a couple of days he sent out those emails, he was feeling good, right? And I don't know, Bob, do you remember the I Love Lucy show and the famous scene of her at the chocolate factory?
I remember that one. I know it's going to date me, Joe. I think I saw it on black and white TV.
Right. Yeah. And the idea was, Lucy was at the chocolate factory and she's happily wrapping these chocolates on this little assembly line and feeling quite good about it. And then guess what happened? Is the chocolates just kept coming and coming and she just couldn't keep up with it. And that's what we have to remember when we think of that fictitious SDR Cody and his ability to keep up with those emails, is at a certain point that now we're in week 4 and week 5, and guess what? Now the second email is going out to prospects. So they're just stacking on one after another. And so our suggestion is, Cadence is fantastic. There's amazing use cases for it. You just have to make sure you can do the calling part of it to keep up with those tasks on schedule. And you need to make sure that the phone calls and emails are really in sync. And if necessary, you just have to send out fewer emails. Otherwise, you're really just spamming out to your database. And the obvious other kind of way to get around this is to push out more dials, to empower your rep to be able to get out a lot more dials and more importantly, have a lot more conversations more quickly. And with that, what we'll do is we'll jump to, again, kind of the tips section of this. Is the other part is, let's make sure that those emails and Cadence work as well as possible. And, one thing that it seems like everyone agrees on in terms of the experts, it's not, unfortunately, not in use by most people, but the experts who study this all seem to think that a short subject line is the way to go. And the reason why is this, is imagine that an email comes through on your iPhone, and if there's a sentence in your subject line to think about, you might not deal with it. If it's a 3-word that's intriguing, you might. So that's where you really want those short subject lines that are enticing, and you want to keep the emails iPhone/mobile friendly, and make sure that, what looks like an easy 3 paragraphs on Outlook, if you look at that on your mobile phone, now you're dealing with kind of scroll fatigue of, oh my, this is a lot. I'll deal with it later. And guess what? Later never comes. So the advice is, keep these Cadence emails short. Try to get to a real call to action. Try to create a curiosity. Of something that is used by the smarter folks is something like, I have an idea that can help you, Bob. Can we talk? And then you probably want to hear more about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so obviously, these are old school things here in terms of AA-ISP has been preaching for a long time, is, mention the past success you've had and establish social proof where possible. But in the world of Cadence, don't be too formal. Instead, it should be an email that's kind of from the desk of Joe to Bob, and something that isn't so formal, doesn't look like that marketing email. And
right.
And the key thing here is really, say you will follow up and actually follow up and make sure that that phone call gets out. And essentially you're building trust as you are saying what you're doing and you know, the phone call, email, that sort of thing.
Hey, Joe, we had, I think, a fantastic tip that came in from Ken, and he said even merging the person's city, where they live or their offices, into the subject line can help to boost open rates. I think that's a really interesting, I call it a dab of personalization, kind of.
Yeah, where you can do that, you should do that. Yeah, where it makes sense to do it. Absolutely. With a lot of B2B data, sometimes it's, you know, it's not particularly clear on that piece of it. But for sure, I agree. Where you can get that personalized in the subject line, do it. But at the same time, without looking spammy, write it as if it would really come from your desk, and you'll do well. So from here, so we've talked about the idea of, you know, cold calling at scale, calling at scale. We've talked about, you know, Cadence email, and that it's fantastic, but you just need to get those calls in there too for it truly to be Cadence. And now we're going to take a minute and look at inbound leads, okay?
That sounds like a plan.
All right, good. So I think too often it's the part that we don't think about enough in a lot of sales organizations, because we are focused on finding that brand new business by doing the outbound calling that is really cold. But obviously, a lot of us benefit from inbound leads, and some inbound leads are better than others. And if you see this slide here, I think more sales managers and more sales reps need to think about the real costs of inbound leads. And this should help walk through it a little bit in terms of, you imagine that Google ad, right? A Google ad for B2B might cost $20, might cost $30 per click. But a lot of those clicks go to a landing page, and the person never fills out the page. So you have to imagine that it might be that there were 20 clicks by the time anyone ever actually filled out a form, and that just to get that form filled out costs $400. And my message today is, just like we saw that the data is really hard, it's hard to get people on the phone, now we have an opportunity to get in front of people that raise their hand. So we better use the phone as effectively as possible and really kind of cherish this lead. And that inbound leads are not like fine wine. They don't age well, right? Every minute that goes by, it gets tougher and tougher. So what I'm suggesting is we really look at some best practices for inbound leads, and think, you know, you've heard the term speed to lead, but it really does matter in terms of getting that person on the phone that filled out the form as quickly as possible. And one of the reasons is that 5 minutes later, they're maybe moved on and not thinking about this problem anymore. That's one potential, right? Another problem is that, guess what they're doing, Bob, if they're not filling out your form, and now they're doing something else. Can you imagine what they might be doing 2 minutes later?
Not really. Go ahead and fill in the blank there.
Yeah, so if they're not filling out your form, they're filling out form number 2, form number 3, form number 4, and so on, and maybe filling out 6 different forms waiting to hear back from someone. Whereas if you get them on the phone and you can present a real good solution for them, they might really not be looking as hard at those other solutions. So the idea is we really need to get them on the phone as quickly as possible. And just like we saw with typical data, it might take 22 calls. The more time that goes on, the harder it's going to get this person, this prospect that's raised their hand on the phone. So our suggestion is you might want to, that initial call, immediately call from your desk line. And as an example, let's say they called into ConnectLeader. We happen to be in New Hampshire, 603. They might be expecting a call from the 603 area code. So use your technology to make sure that your local, your actual number is showing. And then if they don't answer on that, try again with the local presence. See if they'll pick up from that something in their own area. Send an email, and even try to really be pretty aggressive here, because what we find is most of these inbound prospects respect it. They just got busy, but they respect it and they're glad that you're following up. So maybe call an hour later, 3 hours later, try to call twice daily, but remember the cost of the lead, and remember that this is something that it's so much harder to do this stuff with outbound. Here you have someone who's come to you. Make sure you use every trick of the trade to get to them. So that's what I wanted to say about inbound lead follow-up, and that we should just all be looking to leverage our sales engagement tools in that part of the business as well.
Great. We, Joe, we got a few questions that have come in here. Maybe we pause. I know we're a little bit over time. We were planning on half an hour, but it looks like all the attendees are staying put.
Yeah.
So let's keep going and try to
guess what? That's kind of perfect timing, because we are right at the Q&A right now. So
great.
Yeah.
That's great. Here's a great question, and maybe even the audience can type in some answers to this. Can you please give an example of a subject line that's worked for you in the past? And I'm actually going into my sent folder. It'll take me a minute, but I'm looking for something that I got really, really good response on. So I'll share that in a minute. But Joe, do you have any subject lines that you or your team has used that have produced some good results?
You know what? As prepping for this webinar, that's one of the things I did not do. So I'm going to leave this to the audience in terms of if people can type into chat ideas of what works for them. And there's no magical subject line, because part of the problem is when everyone starts using the same one, it starts to work less and less, right? But it's my advice there is keep it short. But I'd be interested if people want to offer up what theirs are.
Yeah, so type in here. Here's one. It says my voicemail. I think that's a good one. I think that's an appropriate use of regarding. I think it's a little touchy to use so use it appropriately. I had someone pretty much, told me to stop using it because it was a little bit, boy, this is way back in the day when I was stupid. But I think that's a really good one. My voicemail is another one that came through. Company name, insert their company name. It's powerful. Here's what I like about having their company name there. Guess what? You personalized it. If someone says, your webinar or something, your outbound calling webinar, I'm going to open it because why? It's about me personally. I presented it.
That's right, and go back to the one of many kind of thing. Okay, this is someone specifically trying to get to me. It would appear, rather this is something that went out to a million other people for sure.
I would like here. We got this one that says the company name, and I'm not sure. I'm looking to see. It's from. I don't have the full name here, but if you put in that, my best subject line is company name. Can you write up an example of what else you might put in that subject line, or is it just their company name? Oh, company name, then the subject. So sort of like, let's say you're looking to get to the CEO of ConnectLeader. So it goes ConnectLeader - upcoming AI conference, right? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Good tip. Excellent.
Right.
Another question. Yep, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and related to that is, when you're looking at Cadence tools, you want something that will be able to send out, the messages really templated, push out a bunch of them, but also give you the opportunity that if you want to get in the way of some of them and be able to write an ultra personalized subject line that has that, the tool should have that kind of personalization feature to be able to send specific ones to specific people.
I did my own little mini campaign back in May when we did an AI for Sales conference, and I was talking to folks like ConnectLeader, right? I was talking with sponsors, and I sent out 14 emails and I personalized them. And out of the 14 emails, I got 7 booked meetings without even picking up the phone.
Wow.
So I'm trying to find one of those emails, and I'll find it here in a minute. And I want to share the subject line I put in there because I forget what I used. But keep those coming in. Here's one: read your article in, or in this case it would be your webinar about outbound calling. Your article in the publication. It's about them. I'm going to open up that email.
That's right. That's something that's true for both you and me, Bob. If you talk about me, you're going to get my attention for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Next question. Can you share any tips about getting past the gatekeeper? And again, if you're in the audience, besides what Joe or I might offer, if you're in the audience, any tips around getting past the gatekeeper?
Yeah, I mean, there's some. For sure, to be as presumptive as possible, to give the gatekeeper as little of a job to do as possible. Meaning, if you start to try to have a conversation engage too much, then maybe you want to do that for the purposes of intel gathering. But if you're trying to get past them, then really be succinct and really kind of presume that Bob's expecting my call kind of thing. You don't have to say that. You can say it with your voice, and the person will be more likely to put you through.
Yeah, have confidence. Be polite, of course, but is Jim at his desk? That kind of thing, where he might the gatekeeper might be thinking that you have a relationship. I also like to have, certainly have personalized information. Such as this thing about your article in Forbes. It would be, I'd like to discuss with him his article in Forbes because our company, blah, blah, blah. So that may have a higher percentage of getting through. Hey, Joe, can you go back one slide here? There was someone that wanted, what do you feel were the 2 best tips that you would pick out? This individual wants to bring it to their customer service manager's attention here, from maybe an inbound service team. Yeah,
in terms of inbound lead follow-up, I mean, it's that speed to lead for sure. And then it's really all of the others combined in terms of, that polite persistence, in terms of making sure that you are on top of them, that very few prospects will be turned off by that. A lot of them will actually be honored. And it's always amazing to me how often, even in our industry, people are thrilled to get the call back so quickly, and they tell me that they filled out forms at other places, they're still waiting, and it's a day, 2 days later.
Crazy. I don't know if you're on the phone, if you want to add your comment on this, but I was talking with Ashley Becker on our team, and we the AA-ISP, we get people sending us emails or leads. They say, hey, interested in going to a local chapter or what have you. We all believe that it's pretty much as soon as you can possibly call them, pick up the phone and call them if they leave their, don't email them, pick up the phone and call them if you have their phone number first. Hey, I just saw this. And I don't think too soon is creepy at all. I really don't. We've had so many people say, wow, I just left this. Yeah, well, we're the AA-ISP. We practice what we preach, right? I know some studies, there's a couple of leading studies out there, one of which says even if you go a little bit longer than 5 minutes, like 15, 20 minutes, they found a little bit better connect rate, but still both of these studies agree, get to them right away.
Right. And Bob, by the way, my answer related to how do you get beyond the gatekeeper, that was for anyone out there, right? But it was kind of a layup question for me, because the real best way to get in front of the gatekeeper, get beyond the gatekeeper, is to use ConnectLeader and have us do that dirty work for you. That's what we can do with our agents, real life people that do that dialing and get beyond that gatekeeper. So the reps don't need to worry about that piece of it.
Right. Good point. Kathleen added, treat the gatekeeper with respect, market them as a partner, or make them feel as a partner. They can help you know when the best time to call. In addition, they might tell you the right person in the company to talk to. So good. Some good tips here. Let's see here. Let me I got a lot. This has probably been one of the most engaged audience. And, Jen Gergen, our director of operations, helps put this on. So Jen, I think we need to give this audience here an award for being the most engaged.
I do agree. I am here in the background and I agree with you.
Yeah, it's great. Here's a comment. As a beginner in the inside sales service world, where I will be calling accounts that we already do business with, what advice could you offer on how to approach this when they're already buying, using our products in a way to get them to purchase more new products? I find this puzzling because it's not new business, but maintaining. Well, look, you're talking about an account manager role. I have a son who has been in account management for about a dozen years, and I've learned a ton from him. And I said, when do you start? When you win the business, a sales exec will turn it over to an account manager, and he goes, I call them immediately. And it's never too soon to reach out, to be in touch, to act as an enablement person, act as a customer success person that's there to make sure that they're getting full use out of whatever you sold them, a service, a product, a SaaS, a software product. And Joe, any thoughts on that kind of that process?
Yeah. I would add to that what is really the trick to life, and that is gratitude, right? That have gratitude and exhibit that gratitude to that customer, that let them know that you really do appreciate their business. Don't let it be unsaid. And from there, I think you can open up a lot of avenues.
Yep. Good. Okay, good. Great. Well, look, everyone, there's a lot more comments here. Some are coming just to us, so I'll read them. Here's another example, opening line of an email or a voicemail. Listen, I'm a big believer. Your first line or two of an email can be your first line or two of a live conversation, or your first line or two of a voicemail. They are interchangeable. There's certain things that Joe shared around brevity, around the subject line, around adding value, around personalization. Here's one here I really like. Hey, I wanted to congratulate you or Jim on winning the last blah, 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 whatever it is. So,
That's right.
Good.
Yeah, because ultimately, Bob, right, it's a hook in either case. And that's what we're doing here is it's so crazy in terms of, it's 5 minutes from now, all of us, our attention will go to something else and 50 things trying to get our attention. So you need that hook in that email. You need the hook in the phone call to make it worth the while for that prospect to give you that minute and then eventually get you that meeting.
Great. All right. With that, some people are beginning to leave. Joe, this has been fantastic. We want to go to the last slide. If you have any questions for either of us, I know there was one individual telling me he's sort of building out a new inside sales team. I would offer my own thoughts and resource to you. Feel free to give me a call. If anyone on the phone is having any kind of inside sales challenge, right? Whether you're designing a new comp plan, you're figuring out a better job ad, you need to reduce attrition, you have to sell the value of inside sales to senior leaders. I don't care what it is. I've probably seen it and done it. So I'm offering up myself. Here's my contact information. Just send me an email. You'll get a reply with a calendar link, and you'll be able to get on my calendar. And also, Joe, first I want to thank you. Just briefly, Joe, I have to ask you a bit about ConnectLeader because we use it here at the association. Mm-hmm. And without going into a product pitch here, give us the secret sauce a little bit, if you will, why this tool can help people.
Yeah, and the secret sauce is that we are kind of the everything in terms of sales engagement. We're not a one-trick pony, and we really marry the best of breed products together to do kind of what I'm talking about is to solve the challenge that we were talking about here today is you got to get the emails out, you got to get the phone calls out, but you need to be able to make sure that you are doing it at a scale that you're actually getting those conversations. And to us here at ConnectLeader, the connects or the conversations are the holy grail, and it's all about getting that rep into a lot more conversations, because inevitably, as you know, Bob, then you'll get a lot more pipeline and then a lot more revenue coming in, and it works out for everyone. But essentially, instead of that problem with that rep that we looked at that was getting 5 to 10 conversations in a day, you press a magical ConnectLeader button, and in 1 hour, you can have maybe 10 to 12 conversations.
It's amazing. You can apply this. Let's not forget this point. Yes, this is this kind of tool. And look, I know ConnectLeader's on the phone here, but there's lots of other technologies. There's lots of other tools that do this. But speaking on ConnectLeader, yes, it's applicable towards pure prospecting when you don't have any kind of affinity or relationship with a person. But here's a great use of it in account management. In fact, we've had nearly 20,000 members come through the doors of the AA-ISP. Almost that many. Wow. And we can't call them all, and when we try to, we don't get a lot of them on the line. So if we're 2 months ahead of the big leadership summit, we'll load our a director VP list into ConnectLeader, turn it on, and we'll get 15, 20, sometimes 50, 60 call conversations in a day, and they're like, oh, the AA-ISP, sure, and you pick it up and say, hey, I'm just reminding you about the summit. So it's a great tool. Anyone wanting to get in touch with you, Joe, we got your phone, we got your email address on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same offer from me in terms of, we see everything, even beyond directly what we help with. We see folks with full stack solutions that we don't have. You want to talk to me or someone else over here and get some guidance in terms of what you should be doing, please reach out. We'd be happy to have that conversation, not necessarily looking to sell you anything. But Bob, an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. Thanks in the background behind the curtain there for producing the show today. Thanks, everyone. Again, top prize, engaged audience. I love it. We're going to see if anybody can top this one in the future, but so far this is it. Good job. Good job. Congratulations to the audience. Have a good day. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.